Okay, Voymonk here. This is not a vlog. This is me doing a recording, and I'm not exactly sure where to put it. It's not going to be ASMR, and it's definitely not going to be 4 hours long. I completed what I feel is the thing I want to produce for my channel for this week, and kind of thinking about some other ideas as far as going forward. I know that it's probably, at least in my eyes, and the way I feel, seems as if this last week, or this week coming ahead, and where I've come to so far, has been a lot about clarification, about establishing a foundation and building things up. And I don't want to go through all that because I've done that so far. So now hopefully it's about more content. And speaking about content, like I said, this isn't a vlog. Just as me sharing some of my thoughts. And honestly, might not even upload this. It's not because of a thing of editing, or I want to be less than honest or transparent about myself and my feelings and whatever I want to do. Just some things don't always make it. And if this happens to be one of those things that does make it, one of the things that I've already mentioned, time and place and what I want to share. And there's not anything about this particularly that I'm going to be sharing that is of, I think, more personal nature. I did kind of touch upon that already in the stuff that I've already described and whatever. But this is just about content, about what general interest and what interest that I mean when I'm talking about the things that I have a love and a passion for. I love the 80s. I love the 90s in terms of pop culture for much of it. Not everything. Obviously, there's things that probably I don't really know that much about. But one of the commentary things that I can say is that when it comes to things that happen, I can speak from my own perspective, like the 80s and 90s. The things that I kind of reflect on are, and I've said this a little bit in terms of in my previous vlogs, and it has a lot to do with the inspiration for the voice vlogging that I'm doing right now, or not vlogging, voice content that I'm creating right now, in the spirit of not editing, being who I am, making mistakes, messing with my stupid back scratcher, which is making a noise that's not good and probably irritating, and I'm going to probably need to apologize for my Friday vlog that I did because I could really hear it, and it's probably and some things that I missed in some of the other vlogs listening back. But I will say, though, that when it comes to content and what's being created, it's... how do I put this? A conversation that I was having with my mom the other day was about, one of the things I found pretty interesting is that when it comes to musicians like Prince, Michael Jackson, Mariah Carey, just giving some examples of people who are artists, writers, producers of music. Smokey Robbins, who's her favorite of all time, and so on. So the point that I'm making is that the truth of the matter is, and it can be the biggest stars you can think of, Elvis Presley, the Beatles, right? And when I talk about pop culture, the thing that I'll notice is that oftentimes when we revere and we think about musicians or movies or anything like that, so much of what is on what I would call the cutting room floor never makes it in to our social consciousness. And I think that's something to consider, especially when it comes to the things that we do now know that is part of our culture. When I think about the 80s and 90s, especially some of the popular songs and movies and stuff, I think about how that's produced. One of the things I was talking about with my mom, I thought was funny, is that I find it When sometimes there's been sit downs with some artists that have made some of the more popular kinds of music, especially the ones that are often referenced, I find it interesting that if you ask them what their favorite songs are and how they feel about the music that they produce, obviously it's going to come through a different lens of someone who's making something as opposed to someone who is consuming something. Now, understand what I mean by that. Meaning that if you make a song and it's a hit and people like it, where does that song come from? You know, sometimes the biggest hits by some artists aren't even their favorite songs at all. In fact, if you go through YouTube and you look it up, you could probably find a lot of sources that you actually find that, songwriters and musicians actually don't actually like certain songs that they're known for and become favorites. Some of it's because of fatigue and maybe overhearing it and having it be saturated into the consciousness, even if it was 30, 40 years ago. But the problem, I shouldn't say the problem, that's somebody else, and I'm not doing a commentary, but I think the interesting thing about that is that, and my overall point is, what about the rest of that didn't necessarily make it to the consciousness of people, society? And the reason that I ask that is because I'm talking about the biggest artist, and the ones that are the most revered and talked about and speculated on. I kind of am curious about what it is that didn't make it through, because sometimes when artists are making songs, it isn't even the artist that necessarily picks the particular songs that they make that will go into an album, especially at first, because really, I've pointed this out in previous vlogs that, especially in more specific, my radio stress test, the second one, is that, the business and the art are two separate but very important parts of the whole thing when it comes to how music is made. Now, some people can resent that. Some people can say what is more important and what they have a bigger interest in. And I'm not having a criticism. Like I said, I'm not making a commentary about that. I just think that even of the material that gets released, I remember one of the things about Prince, who's a hometown hero of where I grew up, he made tons of music. He was a great musician, and he actually not only was self-taught, although he was from a musical background. His father was a musician. He played the instruments. He played the background vocals, I believe. He composed the song arrangements and the sounds, and he wrote and sang all on his own records, all on his own material. And that's pretty exceptional in and of itself. But the thing is that as he became more popular and obviously signed to Warner Brothers for a lot of years, it seemed as though he kind of had a resentment towards the fact that they got to really call a lot of the shots when it came to the material that he wrote. And not only did they get to call most of the shots, they also got to determine how that was presented to people in terms of what would be the most profitable, what would be the most catchy, what would sell. And of course, later on in his life, he also had some issues with the profit sharing and I'm not laughing at, but the profit sharing and who got to make what off of the material that he made. And so considering all that, and like I said, it's not an indictment. It's not something that, like I said, a social commentary. It's just that when you think about that, and I'm picking Prince, but there's plenty of musicians of all different kinds of backgrounds, that even the music that they produce, one of the things I think that he kind of spoke to from places that I've seen, is that he always kind of, when he did records, he always tried to produce them in a way that, certain songs and a certain arrangement and entire records were a part of an experience. And that's my point, is that experience, people can tell you about the most popular songs in the 80s and 90s. And sometimes if it's a record that's got a lot of popular songs or whatever, most can't really tell you about all of the other songs that didn't make it. Cutting room floor, right? Not everybody necessarily has the understanding or the appreciation for the fact that, maybe not every song that Elvis Presley sang was a banger, right? I mean, I guess it's not a criticism. Maybe every song that he did, even if, although successful, might not have necessarily been as close to his heart as others that might have been flat out rejected for one reason or another, either by the record company that wouldn't produce it or put it on a record, or they didn't pick it as one that they would promote. And I think about that because when it comes to video editing and putting on makeup and all the different ways that we can edit ourselves and our authenticity, I think we sometimes forget that, sometimes the things that don't always make it through are just as important as the things that do. And I think what's kind of interesting in a way is that I remember also all too more recently the Justice League films that were produced, and a lot of people were really interested in the fact that the entire movie was done one way, I guess, after it had been done another. And of course, as content is, once it's made, there's also things that have to happen, like editing, it has to be produced and all that. And there's various different reasons why one might be a fan of one version over another. And I'm not here to commentate on which is better or anything like that, but I do find that it's interesting that sometimes when you find out, as with Justice League and the Zack Snyder, I might be messing up his name, version, I've seen it, and it was a great. I didn't even see the original. I saw his, and I thought it was great. And so, but so did a lot of other people. They appreciated it, and some people liked it even more. I think it's also interesting that sometimes when you hear about certain movies, because now we have so much access with the internet and finding out things about movies that might have been cut one way, as opposed to maybe they could have been cut another way. I mean, test audiences, lots of different things. And I talk about these things because I think they're interesting, because, it's like there's the road that's traveled, there's the road that's less traveled, and then there's roads and places that we've never gone. And I often wonder and ask myself about that. I mean, I love pop culture. I love, as far as the 80s and 90s and that, but, I'll be honest, there are, and I think you could probably, if anybody here's listening right now that has had a favorite group or an album or song in that, it's just, you know the cuts, you know the popular songs, but you also know the ones that maybe weren't so popular, that don't get as much play and aren't really discussed or referred to by many people who excuse me, might even consider themselves fans, or really, really, really fans. I find that interesting. And to be honest, I mean, I understand that, like I said, as far as criticism is appropriate in a lot of different places, and I'm not trying to be critical or criticize. I think that's fine. This isn't a vlog or anything like that, and I'm not afraid to do that. I just think I guess I'm just going to steal this from Ted Lasso and the fact that I like to be curious. I like to ask questions about why certain things are a certain way, and maybe, I mean, even if I know and there are some things I can conclude, maybe it's about the things that I don't know that can be pretty interesting. I mean, when it came to Star Trek The Next Generation, who almost wound up being Captain Picard? Or, for example, Back to the Future. For as much as people love that film, it was a hair's away from being a completely, well, I would say completely different film, but would have had a different Marty McFly. And when it comes to some music and records that people, revere and love, and sometimes they really get, attached to a meaning to a song that, quite frankly, I think it's kind of funny because sometimes, when people want to ask those questions about songs, I think, and I've also said this to my mom as well, and I think it's funny, is that some of the things that people take away as meaning are really, really far removed than from what sometimes was actually the intent at the time of things that are produced. And I just think that's funny because, it's a part of our human experience in terms of what is or isn't, and what is defined. I love the 80s and 90s, and it probably, I think, as what Vsauce would say, has a lot to do with where I was and who I am in terms of the way I experienced that. But even though I've experienced things in those ways, I do still kind of wonder about the road that was never traveled rather than less. And I think that, Prince kind of had I think an idea that I like. George Lucas was another one who was very, very much dedicated into the way you would experience Star Wars. I mean, he edited it, but he edited it in a specific way that, Dolby surround sound and the whole theater experience was meant to be in a certain way. I don't do that because I don't really chase that effect or whatever. At least not in that way. I mean, what I say is cringe, as terrible, as maybe boring, honestly very boring, maybe just not interesting, and who cares? That's all right. I'll do the best I can and try to improve. But, it's, I would say in the sense of guys like Prince, guys who are creators of entertainment like George Lucas, there's a method to their madness. And that's why I say I don't think necessarily editing is always a bad thing, or, psychology in terms of how that can be used is bad either. I'm not here for social commentary or criticism. I'm just simply saying that, I think not everything for everybody sometimes, maybe. I don't know, but I think it's something to think about. And so for me, I don't want anything on the cutting room floor. I don't want to leave things out because I'm not worried about an effect for me. I'm not George Lucas, and I'm certainly not Prince. But I think for me, the road that's not usually traveled is the one where you actually get to hear me as a human being, just like you, perhaps, with all the flaws, with all the things that are wrong with me, just like anyone else. But, that doesn't mean that you have to listen. It doesn't mean that you have to care. It doesn't mean that you have to take everything that I put out. I'm just creating something that I hope is as authentic as I possibly can be. And also that it's appropriate when I do that. And so, yeah, I think about that when it comes to not just entertainment, art, but life itself. And for me, the road less traveled is the one that says, hey, you know what? Maybe right now, when it comes to vlogging and social content and doing something like this, the thing that is usually never done is that maybe we just don't really, I think, get to relax. We don't really get to just decompress and really try to seek the things that are fun, not just for fun's sakes, not just for a laugh and ha-ha. I want to touch on that specifically because that's, comedy is great. Lots of things are great. But this, I care more about being a sincere and genuine experience. And I can't ask for that. I can't expect that. And I can't do that unless I'm doing, honestly, the best I can at doing that thing. And so when it comes to my interest in the contents, yeah, that's the kind of stuff I want to talk about. That's the kind of stuff that's interesting, is as far as the things I love and all the things that are great about it to all the things that are different and I don't really necessarily always get to think about all the time and appreciate life in general. So that's going to be this video. And who knows if I actually make this something that I'll put up. We'll see. But until next time, take care.